Well, I don't really know why I need to give this part of the presentation. Because one, you're also well informed, and two, they've already been successfully brainwashed everybody here anyway. That's why I did it. So I don't know why we worry about Common Core. It's like closing the door out the barn or down. But anyway, I am going to talk a little bit about Common Core and Agenda 21 and the link to it. I'm sure a lot of you already know the link and the connections to it, but I'm going to run through my little story. I don't know why I'm setting it off. But anyway, so what's Common Core? Well, it's a set of K-12 education standards for schools. It's developed by the Common Core State Standards Initiative, which was funded by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. And the proponents will tell you it's just a set of standards. I don't know. The problem is they will prepare, they tell our children what they need to know in each grade, and they're going to prepare them to compete in that 21st century global economy. So what's the problem? Well, let's look at what the sales pitch is for Common Core. It says, Common Core State Standards Initiative says that these will be based on the principles of equity at their core. And the Obama administration said that this is going to provide equity in education. So there's one of those E words that we talked about. In the race to the top, grants provided federal funds to incentivize the adoption of the standards, college and career-ready standards, with concern for our most tedious populations, because of course we are most concerned about the poor. So the things that Common Core are going to do, they're going to focus on reducing the achievement gap, which in my personal opinion is the wrong goal. But that's what they're going to do. It's going to raise all the votes by having increased rigor for everybody. It's going to use standardized tests that all students will take to allow measurable and comparable results. That is key, comparable results. And providing equitable distribution of resources so we get that equity coming again. Now we're going to jump over to the UN side of things. We're going to look at their program, Education for All, the report, the Global Monitoring Report. And strangely, it mirrors a lot of those same statements that our administration has been saying. That we need to look at equity, measurability, and finance. And to define those, equity promotes the redistribution of world wealth. When governments decide who needs to get what, this is not a voluntary sharing, it's punishable. And it's forced redistribution. It has measurability. Again, we want to be able to compare everybody and have central governance control that by having data collected by testing teachers and students. And finance, again, the United States is going to do the lion's share of the financing of this to the tune of around $53 billion and redistribute resources around the globe.
That's actually their words?
That's their words.
Wow.
I got the link there at the bottom. See what they're So you have a great plan. Well, the plan is nice if they have it, but somebody's got to be pushing that plan, has to be backing that plan. So let's look at a couple of the key players in that. This is Sir Michael Barber. He's the CEO of Pearson Inc. Pearson is the largest education supply company in the world. They will do it all. They will provide the curriculum and the textbooks, do all the testing, do teacher evaluations, and most recently now they are working on student behavior assessments. His ideology includes things like he praises and promotes nationalized education, and he lumps Common Core in with that. These are the education should be borderless. They talk about Common Core as really helpful for all those kids that move. So all the kids should be learning the exact same things no matter where they go. Let's set aside for a moment that in order to truly be able to do that, you would actually have to have a common curriculum. And you would have to have it very scripted and very prescribed that everybody's on the same page every day, because you never know when that child is going to move. So if the most important goal is to make sure they don't miss anything, you are not talking about just a set of standards where we locally control the curriculum. You are talking about a nationalized or global curriculum. Defines education as needing to be ethically underpinned by the environmental movement. Okay, we all know how they're using ethics to promote environmentalism. We have an ethical responsibility to save the planet, and we're going to be teaching that to our kids. It promotes global databases that compare people in all the global education situations. Do you want to say global database? We're going to tell you a little bit about the global databases we're setting up here. Now, he wrote a book called Deliverology, which is his philosophy that if we collect data and we set targets and metrics for any system, that we can produce efficient outcomes and we can make things so much better. Now, this concept of deliverology was applied to the British healthcare system. What it did was it said set certain targets for the hospitals. You had to see a patient within a certain amount of time. Set your goals. That resulted in people being stuck in ambulances for hours because the hospital would not let them offload the patient into the emergency room because that started the clock ticking. And they didn't want the clock to start ticking. That further went to the ambulance companies stopping to go and respond to their version of the 911 call because they knew the hospital wasn't going to take the patient and they didn't want them dying in the ambulance. He wants to apply this system to education. And he wants to make it irreversible. That's his biggest goal. You might be operating the VA.
Obamacare.
Yeah.
Like the airline system.
Here's another global player that we're all very familiar with, Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft. Now maybe you didn't know that Bill Gates signed an agreement with UNESCO, which is the education branch of the United Nations. And in that he said Microsoft supports the objectives as outlined in UNESCO's constitution and intends to contribute, financially and otherwise, to support UNESCO's program priorities. What are those priorities? They are to teach the same standards to all children and adults on a global scale. Okay, this completely supersedes local control over what is taught, and it overrides the U.S. Constitution, and Bill Gates is fully on board with that. Bill Gates' goal, he stated in a statement to the National Council of State Legislators, was it was Common Core for the first time. The greatest benefit was that they were going to have a uniform base of customers. That's great, so we can change the entire education of the world just for the benefit of the suppliers for education. But he is talking about having a uniform set of things that everybody on the planet thinks that we can gear all of our education materials to, and that is in fact the case right now. Every education supplier out there has something in, if not their entire product line, at least a great portion of their product line, stamped aligned to Common Core. They can't afford not to right now. We've created this black hole that's sucking it in. So even if you're homeschooling, if you're in a private school, Christian school, your ability to find materials that are not aligned to Common Core is very limited. So congratulations. If I like a man who puts his money where his mouth is, this is an updated chart of all the groups that the Gates Foundation has funded in the last 5 years. So, in addition to the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, these are some other groups, the National Association of State Boards of Education, so your National Board of Education, the Missouri School Board Association, they're all on board with that. The PTA, the Military Child Education Coalition, the National Councils of Teachers of English. So anytime somebody's out there telling you they like Common Core, they're probably on this list somewhere. We went to the universities, and you'll notice I highlighted there the University of Missouri Columbia. They received $250,000 with the specific stipulation that the money is to be used to promote Common Core. This was not just a random research grant to the universities. There are a number of foundations that were given money in order to support Common Core, and I highlighted Thomas P. Fordham Institute because they have been going around the country on their $2 million donation to the Gates Foundation to make sure states like Missouri didn't accidentally get out of Common Core, which we probably didn't mean to do. We didn't want to have bad standards. I would like somebody to be paying me that much to have the other point. So you have that. So now we've talked about private people. Private industry can do what they want in a free market system. But when you couple private interests with government, then I start to have a real problem with it. And here is our Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, speaking to UNESCO back in 2010, telling them about the American education program that was going on. Why did he feel the need to explain to UNESCO what America was doing with our education program? And he was specifically talking about what we were doing with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the stimulus funds that we did back then. Remember, we were in a recession, and they were going to pummel this money back into the economy to try and keep things going. And so he told them that, well, we made all this money available through state fiscal stabilization funds that the governors could apply for as long as they agreed to do a few education reform measures, known as the 4 assurances. And I just noticed this last night. The very end of that statement says that it was designed largely to stem job loss among teachers and principals. Now, we had no massive loss of students. We had no schools closing, so certainly no reason that we'd be getting rid of principals. And in terms of teachers, let's look at the 4 assurances and see where that money went for teachers. So the first assurance that they had to agree to was that they would adopt a set of college and career-ready standards And conveniently, they knew that at the time, the only ones that existed that everybody had agreed upon, that were college and career ready at least, was the Common Core standards. They had to adopt high-quality assessments that were aligned to their standards. Remember, we want measurability, so let's make sure everybody agrees that we're all going to take a test so we can measure how we're doing. Then we're going to establish databases. We're going to have a system that's going to track kids from preschool through college and into the workforce to track data. National Data Quality Campaign, this is a program run by the U.S. Department of Education, has told all of the states, these are the data points we would like you to collect. Set up the models, tell you exactly how you're going to codify those. We can't have a national database, that's forbidden by federal law, that's just a little nuisance. We'll hop over that by making all the states set up the exact same database. We'll give the federal government access to that database, thereby creating a de facto national database. So that's the data portion, the measurability. Then we're going to increase teacher effectiveness and address inequities in the distribution of highly qualified teachers. So that redistribution of resources does not just mean money. This means they had some very specific means that they wanted states to use to evaluate their teachers. And when I say specific, the state of Washington followed most of those rules. In fact, the state of Washington is way ahead of us in terms of a lot of this education reform stuff. They have been tracking or evaluating their teachers using student test scores for about 7 years now. So they are very far ahead of the curve, but they're using their own tests. And their legislature considered this particular measure. These four things were not only in the state fiscal stabilization fund applications, but they were also in the No Child Left Behind waiver application. So one way or another, they're going to get you to agree to these four things. And one of the things was that you had to use student test scores to evaluate your teachers. So Washington State thought about it and said, you know, we've been doing this for years, so we're just going to keep doing what we've been doing. The U.S. Department of Education is now threatening to withdraw their waiver because they didn't use the test that the U.S. Department of Ed wanted them to use. So this is not about local control. They obviously don't believe in local control. And where is that saving teachers' jobs? Where in this list is it saying, and we want some of this money to go to save teachers' jobs? The last thing was to have a turnaround model for your failing schools.
And what are they going to use in place of teachers?
These things. These are wonderful teachers. They're very inexpensive. They're professional development. It's cheap.
And they
Microsoft.
and they don't talk back and they can fly.
That's right.
They will fly.
That's right. Exactly. And they're very upfront about that. They talk about reducing the cost of education by using whatever technology could be. Now, Missouri did get state fiscal stabilization funds. Altogether, we got $1.7 billion. The governor has basically been able to use his own personal slush fund. A lot of that money did go to setting up the statewide database. So you're saying, okay, fine, get to Agenda 21 part of it.
Another byproduct about the computerized education is parents will never know what they're teaching them.
That's right.
Let's say, who do they ask questions? I mean, where do they go to ask questions?
You don't?
You don't need to ask questions. You just do what we tell you to
But you
do.
don't understand what it means.
You just sit
They dumb it down enough for you to
And
understand.
as the students go online, as they go on to the Google education apps that are out there that have been given for free to the schools, Google's collecting data that whole time. You have 10 million students in the United States logged on and doing these things. Let's face it, there's going to be only so many different questions. They're going to be able to anticipate almost any question a student could possibly have, and the program will just flip through to the right answer and give that to the student. The teachers will essentially become a bouncer in the classroom, just to make sure that the kids stay and don't hurt each other.
We are now.
All right, so the Division for Sustainable Development, this is the Agenda 21 document. Chapter 36 of Agenda 21, it talks about education, public awareness, and training. It says this is a cross-sectoral theme that is relevant to the implementation, is in fact indispensable. So education is an indispensable part of Agenda 21. Section 36.2 says we should reorient worldwide education towards sustainable development. Okay? So we're going to start tracking the kids from preschool on through college. We're going to reorient education towards sustainable development. By the time they're in middle school, that will be second nature to them. That will be completely normal. And the way we all think about what we want our society to look like will seem so foreign to the kids. And this is kind of important because this theme runs throughout. We're going to use both formal and informal versions of education, and it's critical for achieving environmental and ethical awareness. So now we're going to put the ethical burden on our children that they have to do this thing because it's immoral to do otherwise. Because we're going to change the values and attitudes, skills, and behavior of our students. That changing the values and attitudes and disposition is woven all throughout Common Core and is clearly a part here of Agenda 21. From this document, it said UNESCO wants to integrate the values inherent in sustainable development into all aspects of learning and to encourage changes in attitudes and behaviors and allow for more sustainable and just society for all. Carl Lindbergh gave a speech to UNESCO in 2005, and he ran down what again, UNESCO needed to be focusing on in terms of their educational efforts. He said, power and responsibility to affect positive change on a global scale. We have to teach our kids that it's their job to make sure that they affect change and on a global scale. That education is the primary agent of transformation towards sustainable development. That education fosters the values, behaviors, and lifestyles required for sustainable future. When you're teaching everybody the same thing, we already know that kids don't come with the same abilities, the same cognitive abilities. And you notice nowhere in any of this are they talking about content knowledge. They're talking about values and behaviors. You want everybody to get to a proficient level, and you're just talking about some values and behaviors. That's a lot easier and more attainable goal than if you're talking about everybody having content knowledge and deep knowledge of any of the particular subjects. And this one I love, that's why I highlighted it a little bit different. It said, we want to teach the kids to make decisions that consider the long-term future of the equity, economy, and ecology of all communities. Talk about heavy burden on these kids. Yeah. We don't know, technology is changing so fast right now, we don't know what's going to be possible 40 years from now, let alone 20 years from now. We didn't know about fracking not that long ago. We thought the fuel supply was drying up while we have fracking. So to put the burden on our children that they're going to have to consider in every one of their decisions, how is this going to affect long-term when they can't imagine 4 years from now? How's it going to affect the economy? Clearly, we have people running right now that don't know how the economy is. And equity. Equity is being literally defined as making sure everybody has the same stuff. Okay? I love both my children. I don't give them the same stuff. I give them what they need, which is very different for the two of them. On our side, at the U.S. Department of Education, we put out this report promoting grit, tenacity, and perseverance. This is a crazy report, I agree. It talks about gathering that data again so that we learn what stimulates a kid, what gets to their values. That's what the purpose of this particular report was. It's not yet on changing the values, it's on how do we gather the data so we can figure out how to get the kids to change their values and their behaviors. But it does say that there's an increased attention on 21st century competencies, which encompass a range of non-cognitive factors of grit, but in part, and persistence is part of the Common Core state standards in mathematics. They have to have the kids persist in finding an answer. You don't tell them how to solve a problem, they have to persist in finding it on their own.
That's that new math thing, right?
That's right. Just constructivism.
Fuzzy.
So there's a growing movement to explore the potential of the non-cognitive factors, those attributes, dispositions, social skills, attitudes, interpersonal resources, independent of intellectual ability. Because we're not worried about the kids' intellectual ability. We're worried about how do we manipulate them into having these different attitudes and dispositions.
So, if they have effectively removed God from all of our public entities, they are now through Common Core telling you how you should morally behave in the world.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
They've been doing that for years.
This is
It's in writing.
yeah, exactly. It's a concerted effort.
We had a book at Parkway, this is like 20 years ago, that we were supposed to be going through like one of the sections a day to read to the kids on behavior. It was ridiculous. I put the book down.
Yeah.
And it didn't work anyway.
Using the Delphi technique against these kids who don't have the training or the skills to know how to fight against it.
It's bullying in a very dumbed down way.
So there's no bullying, anti-bullying up there. And trying the whole time to keep the parents in the dark about it. That's what concerns me most about this. As you said, I don't know what's going to be on here. And parents have been told they can't see it. Pearson has been paying off districts with the offer of laptops if they would participate in the testing of this student behavior assessment that they're developing. And as I said, if money's involved, government entities are willing to do anything. Parents are not allowed to see what's in this behavioral assessment. In fact, one parent called Pearson, and Pearson threatened her with legal action if she should even try and sneak a look at it. And if anybody in the district should show her it, they would sue the district
Your
as well.
kid's school record, you will not be
Well, you may be able to see a version of it. And who knows, there was a parent in Utah who tried to see what was in his student's record, and he was told it would cost $10,000 to pull together all the information that the state had on his subject.
Oh my God.
So if he could come up with the 10,000, they might attempt to gather the data together. Head Start, 40-year program, kind of a failure except for the poorest of poor. But it continues, and now they have just added the social and emotional learning components to their program. Again, we're looking at starting at the very early ages, forming those beliefs and attitudes, teaching them self-control, cooperation, social relationships, but they're going to come in very handy when they're living in those closed communities. Knowledge of families and communities.
And did the Republican supermajority in Jefferson City also help put through a bill to help fund Head Start even more in the state of Missouri? I thought so. Just saying.
It's for the children.
Yeah.
We will do anything for the children. United Nations Environment Program says to be effective, environment and development education should deal with the dynamics of both physical and biological, and it should be integrated into all disciplines. So a lot of people, pro-Common Core people say it's just standards and it's just language arts and math. What's the big deal? What are you worried about? Well, here they're saying it should be integrated into all disciplines. So I remind you, the Common Core English Language Arts standards, they're art standards and literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects. They are across all subjects. So they can take any ideology they want, put it in there and say, well, it's a language arts standard. So for example, here's a paper, it's a writing lesson for 4th grade, and it asks them which person is more likely to influence people in a positive way.
I can't tell the difference.
I'd have circular both.
Put an extra on that.
That's right.
You got a circle.
A dad or draw a mask on the one on the right.
And I don't even know who the publisher is. Doesn't matter at this point. Pearson has bought up most of the publishers, so even if it says somebody else, you can do it. Children.
Now we call our names.
Here's a program by Crayola. Okay, the crayon guys, we give our kids like crayons. Citizenship and communication. Global citizens explore global issues. So take your Crayola crayons, come up with an issue with global significance, do a drawing, and consider what citizens could do about this instance. So we're teaching our very young kids across every spectrum, including art class now, to think global.
I have to say this because my kid just graduated from high school, and he was, yeah, right. He was talking about Common Core because he's got mom look, and he sent me a picture of a Common Core book in his library. So it hadn't been fully implemented, it was a soft sell of it. But in one of his classes, they were supposed to pick a topic that they believed in. So, like, say for instance, guns, and they felt they have the right for guns. They were supposed to argue the opposite.
The opposite of the reverse.
So if he believed in gun rights, he had to make an argument to not have gun rights.
Yeah.
What is that?
That's about building empathy for the other person.
Yeah.
And that's also about moral relativity, where there is no absolute right and wrong anymore. You can justify any position, teaching them to
Oh.
And we learned at the Education Policy Conference that we had back in January, that we're not teaching Shakespeare or any literature or any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
But recently I had a cousin tell me that in their grade school, they're teaching, the reading list contains a book called Blue Eye. Are you familiar with that?
Blue Eyes, yeah.
Is that really true?
That is one of the books listed in Appendix B of the CCSSI language arts standards.
Okay.
That's supposed to be, you know, an exemplar list, and in the bill that passed through the Missouri legislature, they said you don't have to do anything in Appendix B. But typically what happens when districts get a new set of standards and there's an appendix like that with a suggested reading list, they'll just take what's on that reading list because you're pretty sure that that's going to be on the test. And now that we've made teacher accreditation or teacher evaluation and district accreditation based on your student test scores, you're going to do everything you can to make sure that you do well on those student test scores. So if that book is on there, you may very well try to cover it.
Is that the one with the oral sex excerpt out of it?
That's
Yeah,
among
I mean,
other
it's-
things that I heard about.
Right.
They won't teach them about Shakespeare or anything else, but rape and everything else is fine.
Right.
That's just,
It's about essentially
Yeah,
a
it's just-
pedophile.
yeah.
The topic of the book. To me, it's a glimpse into the minds of the people that wrote the standards.
yeah.
So,
Right.
I don't think, and one of the rationales was, well, we have kids from the inner city who are experiencing this kind of thing in their real life. They need to be able to deal with it. I said, or we could think of schools as the safe haven where they could get away from all that stuff.
Yeah.
And not have to expose the other kids who don't have to deal with that
Exactly.
to the worst of human behavior.
In order for teachers to, you know, be, I'm sorry, I'm losing words, promoted on and taken, and have their job every year, what you do is you teach to the test. And you spend, I was with one, we taught on teams, I taught one where I was allowed all my creativity, I mean, we had a class, and they actually learned something. And I got put on a team the following year that they started this math thing, you know, and No Child Left Behind, and so I could throw all my lesson plans out the door. The head of my department wanted to hand me a set of worksheets for every single week, and I said, honey, I have 28 years worth of plans. Well, just so they passed the MAP. That's all that matters. And then after the MAP, I could start teaching the way I wanted, and the kids really enjoyed education. But other than that, it was just boring. I mean, and I taught to the test. I wanted my job the next year.
Sure, I mean, that's absolutely where our teachers are going to be. And there were 7 points, in the No Child Left Behind waivers and the Race to the Top grant applications. 7 things that they wanted to be included in the teacher evaluation system. So I don't know how many of you have gone to your districts and noticed that they just talked about their new evaluation system as if they came up with it on their own. They didn't. It actually came from the federal government. It got washed and laundered through DESE and became the state system. And it contained things like having a portion of the teacher's evaluation based on student test scores. U.S. Department of Ed would like that percentage to be 50%. And we have to do a lot of work to educate the public as to what taking a standardized test really indicates. Mostly what it indicates is whether you come from a poor household or a well-off household. There is very, very little correlation between what the teacher teaches in the classroom or how good a teacher he or she is and how you do on that test score, especially when you tell kids it doesn't count for your grade. Where is their motivation? Where is their accountability in the process? And there will be a ballot issue, I'm pretty sure, on the ballot this November, talking about teacher tenure, which is being promoted by our buddy Rex Sinkfeld, local billionaire. And he follows that whole line of thinking that we have to demonize the teachers and blame everything on the teachers. When honestly, when you look at the inner city schools and you have kids that are going from place to place because they never know where they're going to sleep each night, they probably didn't eat since lunch the day before, boyfriend just moved back in and mom and dad are fighting all the time, they got all that stress, and somehow we expect them to leave that all at the door when they cross the threshold into the school, and now I'm here to work and pay attention and be happy. Not going to happen. In the best of circumstances, and there are teachers who tried really hard who've been in the inner cities and they thought they reached a kid, but then something would change at home and they lost that kid entirely. You're going to base that teacher's continued employment on whether or not the kids they happen to get that year are any good or not. What about our special education teachers who get the kids who struggle with tests and things like that? You're going to demonize them because their kids didn't do well?
But they're also sitting in our classroom and part of our, you know, like,
Right.
you know, I have special ed kids in my class.
Right.
And some of them, they lower the standards so that they can pass the test, but they can't do it on things like this. So it looked like I'm a student teacher. You know.
Yeah. So, we need to vote against that particular initiative, because that is not going to help anybody in the long run. It's going to turn teachers to try and put out kids, say, I don't want to have any of those special needs kids in my class, and it's going to be ugly. And I just want to briefly talk about this survey that was done by Microsoft Learning Partners in Pearson. They got together, they paid Gallup to go do a survey for them about what do businesses want. Okay, because this is all supposed to be to prepare our kids for that global economy, to prepare them for careers, right, college and careers. So these were the 7 skills that they said the kids, job applicants needed to have. So collaboration, the ability to work with others, knowledge construction, skilled communication, global awareness, because I don't know why that's important for pizza plumbing, but apparently it is. Self-regulation, I think we've always had that as a goal in school, right? Trying to get our kids to fall in line. Real-world problem solving and use of technology for learning. That's what they said they want. Now, nowhere in there does it say we need content knowledge, we need specific knowledge of our industry, we need skill communication. Okay, that one is we did a study here in St. Louis by 1,500 area employers, and these were employers who said, I can't find eligible candidates or employees. I'm really struggling. So they said, well, what's missing? What do you need from these employees? The number one reason that they said they couldn't find a qualified candidate was that they lacked industry experience. In other words, we want somebody who's already done this job. We don't want to have to train them. I'm not sure how any of Common Core or any of the rest of that's going to fix that. Number 2 reason, poor work ethic. But be clear that they weren't just talking about, show up to work on time and come in every day of the week. When we looked at a company, there was another company in Memphis, Tennessee called Mimeo. And they produced greeting cards with a lot of printed materials. They also said, we can't get anybody in here with a good work ethic. They wanted people to come in whenever they found they needed help. So there was no set schedule for them. Because people said, I have a family, I gotta get my kid to school every day, I gotta be there, in their home or take them to a lesson. I can work, if you give me a set schedule, I can work my family things around that, but I can't if you're gonna just give me a random schedule. They wanted them to work weekends, they wanted them to work long nights. Basically, the company wants people who will put family and personal issues completely behind the company's needs. I understand why companies would want to do that, but that does not mean that you have a poor work ethic. That means you just have a different set of priorities. The other reason is the lack of interpersonal skills. I hate to say it, but technology is making this worse. A lack of teamwork and collaboration skills, and a lack of willingness to learn on the job. But notice that less than 10% cited a lack of math or reading skills. Okay, so our schools are not failing our kids, even though we've all been told they have. And I'm gonna leave it there so we have time for Q&A.
How much do you have left?
Okay, just one more slide.
Because I was gonna take a poll if everybody wants to continue, I think, can we stay here, Tom? So,
Ma'am?
can we extend our time?
Oh, sure.
Okay,
Yeah, we're good.
it's up to you guys, if, I don't wanna lose you before we close, you wanna, everybody good to go? Okay, keep going.
I'm going to be working on something over the summer. There's the ACT Work Keys program, and somebody did mention the Career Ready Communities. It's part of an ACT initiative. We used to have education as a sorting mechanism, and there's a lot of people that look at education with a bit of a nostalgia for the old schools that we went to, and they think how wonderful it was for them. But really, our schools were a sorting tool. There were kids who were identified early on who were gifted, and those were kids that went on to college. There were kids who were identified early on as had problems, and we didn't spend as much effort on them. We didn't educate the 40% teenage pregnancy that we had back in the 50s. We have a much lower teenage pregnancy rate now than we did back in the 50s. We didn't educate a lot of the minorities. We didn't worry about them. We certainly did not spend a lot of our education focus on kids with disabilities. So when an employer saw somebody that graduated high school, that was one hurdle that they crossed. When they went to college, that was another great hurdle. So that was a great sorting tool for companies to find out who were the good employees. We've shifted our goal of education to make everybody rise to a certain proficiency level. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but we now made them no longer a sorting mechanism. So our businesses are saying, well, now we don't know who's good anymore because you put everybody on to college. You make as many people as possible graduate high school. And we don't know if that student graduated high school because they got it right away and they internalize the information, we're able to use it to solve problems quickly, or whether you help them every step of the way and they got to take the test 3 and 4 times, which is what we do now. Okay, all I know is you said they graduated, or you said they're proficient. At some point in time, they've performed at a level of proficient. So now ACT has stepped in with that sorting tool again, and they call it the Work Keys program. So now if you want to apply for a job, there are companies who have signed on to this program and said, I will only interview candidates that pass the ACT Work Keys test. And there are people in their 40s and 50s that go in with years of experience in the industry, but they can't pass the test because, well, frankly, they haven't had to use geometry and algebra in their everyday work life. They can't even get an interview because they haven't passed that test. Now, ACT is more than happy to take their money and train them how to pass that test, but it becomes a private industry that is now a gatekeeper to getting a job. But it's because we ultimately needed that sorting tool. So I just look at all that and say, we haven't really decided what we want education to do, and we're trying to do everything and conflicting things at the same time. So until we start getting back to our local communities and having that discussion very locally, what do we want our schools to do? What do we want this school in my district to be focusing on and accomplishing? We're going to stay in this mishmash. And are you going to come up then, we're talking about legislation?
Yeah, yes, whatever.
Yeah. Not fun.
Maybe 15 minutes of Q&A, if it takes that long, for anybody, if all you guys want to go up and they can shoot questions. Anybody have questions?
legislation.
Oh, legislation, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm totally in a different time for them. Sorry about that.
Well, I'll kind of give the quick wrap up. What we ended up with on Common Core, hopefully so you know, is HB 1490 kind of came out, and it was a compromise bill. It was step one. I think it's a step in the right direction. It brings control back to the state. Now, what happens with that control still remains to be seen, but there will be work groups that will be set up to develop standards for the state. It will consist of teachers that have at least 10 years teaching experience are residents of the state. It will also have parents on the work groups. So we've attempted to address some of the problems that they had in Indiana where the work groups got taken over by Common Core. There's some student data protection in the bill. It is by no means close to what we wanted. Again, it's kind of a step in the right direction, but we probably will come back next year again with another student data bill. We'll let you know Google single-handedly killed that bill. They went in and told the legislators that our bill would prevent any student from getting on the internet at school. God forbid, they not be able to get on the internet at school. And quite honestly, any decent IT person who's in charge of a district's IT does not want students to get on the internet in any way they want when they're in school.
Let me ask you this question. They can get on the internet at school on their phones, right? But they're saying that they can't use their iPads that the school provided them, and that's the problem?
Yeah, well,
Because if our kids really needed to get on the internet, they got their phones with them.
the thing was, the bill said that the school had to be able to account for any data that was collected, who collected it, how it was used. Google has given out all these free education apps, and you log onto the internet to get to the Google apps, and then the whole time your kid is on it, they're collecting data. All it would have required was Google to say, this is the data we collect, and this is how we plan to use it. Of course, Google doesn't want to tell you that. It would have been a simple matter of one more form that you fill out at the beginning of the year that says, I give my child permission to go online and do this. That's not the case. And you're right, they could, for those that have phones and for schools that allow them to get on their phones, they could certainly do that on their own personal device.
So like I didn't let my kids sign that form, and they made me look like I had a third eye, right? And is that why they want your kid to be able to get on there?
Yes.
Because they're gonna do that data mining? And again, my thing is like, why does he need to get on here and be a part of, this, what do they call it, technology access or whatever like that? He can get on his phone when he needs to do any kind of research, if he has to do it at school.
Right.
But they can still get on the internet, it just wasn't Google wasn't going to be able to collect the data, that's the
Well, of course, Google didn't present it that way to the legislators. Google made it sound like nobody could ever get on anything on the
But
internet.
the bill
which is-
didn't prevent that, when we were trying to explain that.
Right,
It was
right, our bill did not prevent it.
Google.
But it just tells you kind of, gives you a hint of the amount of power they had. They
So
did very
does the
little.
way the school works when they try to get onto the internet at school, they have to like put their student number in and everything, and that identifies who they are?
Right, and so with the Google apps, so they log on at school and they do their, little assignment for whatever it is in the app. And let's say they didn't get done, but the teacher has assigned that as homework. Well, then they go home, they can log on at home through the gateway. Now Google has not only their school IP, but they have their home IP. And Google knows an awful lot about the IPs and that geography. So what kind of socioeconomic level you're living in, how many people are in that house logging on, a lot more. And with the metadata that they use, it can tell an awful lot about that child. And there's some parents who are perfectly fine with that. So
Some don't even
No,
know it's
consent.
happening.
That's
I
right.
mean, and I told my son, I said, because some of those apps and some of those programs the school wants you to use, you have to sign a privacy agreement and a user agreement.
Yep.
And I said, under no circumstance do you push I agree. And if he doesn't, he can't use the app, he
Right.
can't use the program, and they can't compel you to do it.
right.
So that's how we got around it.
Yeah, and the schools need to have an alternative assignment for the kids to do. They're obligated to provide so many hours of instruction. Sending the kids to a Google app is not hours of instruction. It's not, or certainly not the only option for hours of instruction. Same thing with the books. If some teacher wants to give kids the option of reading The Bluest Eyes and their parents don't have a problem with it, okay. But they should have the option to read Catcher in the Rye instead. That was the parent who was arrested in New Hampshire. That was all he was asking for, just give me an option. So I don't think the parents are being unreasonable. They're not saying burn the books. They're not saying don't get on the internet. Just say, I need to know what it is you're collecting and what you're going to do with it, or I need an alternative. So our data bills didn't pass, and our bill to have the State Board of Education elected instead of appointed by the governor also didn't pass, although it takes a bill 2 to 3 years to really work its way through the legislature. This was the first pass, so the fact that it went as far as it did, and in fact there were 5 bills out there at one point addressing that same exact issue in slightly different ways, but trying to do some sort of change to the State Board of Education, because Peter Herschen, who's been on there for 23 years, is not doing any kind of a job. He didn't know anything about Common Core, and when we gave a presentation, didn't care. So that's where our legislation is. Oh, so 1490 passed, the legislature is still sitting on the governor's desk because a lot of the special interest groups were involved in making the amendments to it and eventually got behind it. He's in a much harder position of having to veto it because now he may be standing very much alone.
Do you think he will veto it? What's your sense?
It's really funny because I've talked to several people down from Jeff City and asked that same question, and they said, right now, he's really hard to read. We don't know what he's going to do.